Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Wenn eine alle Dinge verstund, which translates to if one understands all things. It's a pretty interesting chorale. The introduction is probably the most interesting part of this movement, but there's also some key conflict that's going on between the key signature and just the overall tonality of the chorale. It stays in and around G minor the entire time, but you'll notice there's only one flat in the key signature. I think this is an artifact of the transposed modes and how they would composers would artificially add accidentals in certain places to reflect the modification of the mode. So instead of D minor, we have G minor, where we get the E flats added in. And that works in Bach's favor in some cases because he uses E natural in cases along with F sharp to imply melodic minor. So that E flat is really more like a colorful tone. It fluctuates and doesn't have a static accidental. But regardless, we start on A major and end on D major. So this A major chord in the context of G minor is 5 of 5, right? Because it's the dominant of our dominant. Then we have an interesting 2-bar phrase, two beat phrase. We have D, D, F sharp, so we're thinking it's going to resolve where we expect it to, but B flat. So this would be like a 3 augmented chord in first inversion, literally, but I think this B is actually more so a suspension over the D, and this G becomes a suspension over the D as well. So I really do think that 5 is what's being implied here, and it's just occurring over a larger swath of the harmonic rhythm. So this B flat, looked in a larger context, really is just an accented non-chord tone. But then we get a passing 7th on the bass, and then the G resolves down to F sharp, and it's interrupted, so we get a tritone resolution, which is kind of oxymoronic, right? We don't expect the tritone to be what was resolved to, but Bach is about the crunchy counterpoint. But then we have B flat, D, G, and G, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, G minor, passing tone in the alto, A, D, B flat, and D. This A is an accented non-chord tone. This is just a G minor chord in root position. F sharp, D, A, and D, that's D major in first inversion, which is our dominant. Passing 7th in the melody, G, D. This A is a 9/8 suspension over the bass that resolves, and then B flat. It's a tonic triad in root position, and then we cadence on D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a half cadence. And this is a pretty straightforward half cadence too, where we have the 5th of the chord in the melody. That's typical of Bach's half cadences in his chorale writing, but also just being preceded by a tonic. It's pretty textbook. Looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor. I don't think we modulate at any point. We start off with an interesting chord, A, D, F sharp, and C. This is a D7 chord over A, so 5, 4, 3. Probably the most uncommon of the inversions, to be honest. Just second inversion in general is fairly rare in Bach's music in comparison to the other chords, but you do probably see one on average each chorale, but the 4-3 is probably the most uncommon rotation of the chord. And that resolves to B flat, D, G, and B flat, which is a 1-6 chord. So it kind of does what a 4-2 chord does, but resolves in the opposite direction. It resolves up rather than resolving down, but the 7th still resolves downward. Passing tone in the bass as well. Before we go to D, D, F natural, and A with a passing 7th in the tenor, this is a minor 5, and I think this is more so a byproduct of a harmonization of the just natural diatonic minor scale. E flat, B flat, E flat, and G. So D minor going to E flat feels kind of like B flat major a little bit here, with a sprinkling of G minor going on. But then we have a passing tone in the alto. We then have D, E flat, G, and A, which I think is more likely to be this D being an accented non-chord tone, and it's this C that we're looking at. This B flat is not a chord tone either, but we have C, E flat, G, and A, which is A minor 7 flat 5 in first inversion, so 2-6-5. You know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords, and it's coming from a 6 chord too, which makes sense. We have D, D, G, and B flat, which is G minor over D. There's our second inversion triad in anticipation for the cadence. Share the bass, D, D, F sharp, and A. That's a D major triad. That's our 5 chord, a little delayed 7th there. And then we cadence on G minor in root position, or 1 chord. Let's add this bracket right here too. Some textbooks do that sort of thing. Moving ahead to the next phrase, it cadences in the key of F major, but I think it does so via the key of D minor. So first thing we start off with is a G minor triad. The only thing that changes is the bass register. I do think this is the subdominant now in the key of D minor, especially because we have C sharps moving forward. C sharp, A, E, and A. That's A major in first inversion, which is our dominant. Then we have D, A, D, and F. A little bit of foreshadowing here with this F natural, this D minor chord, seeing that this is how it's going to end up happening in the B section. We then have A, C sharp, and E, which is our root position 5 chord, very similar to the first cadence, 5-6-1-5. We've seen this particular chord progression, just a different, slightly different, actually very similar actually between these two. But then we have a passing tone, or more specifically a passing 7th in the tenor before we get B flat, F, D, and D in the key of D minor. That is our 6 chord. So here's a deceptive progression. I think we're moving to the key of F here, and this is now our subdominant 4. We have a couple of non-chord tones here, one in the melody, which is a passing tone, and, well, they're actually both passing tones, one in the tenor. So moving to the key of F major, we have that C natural, so we know the modulation is happening in and around here, and I usually think the modulation happens a little bit before the introduction or the change of accidental. Here we have C natural, we have C sharps before, it's happening in and between, in and around, or between is what I was trying to say, but I fused them together. A, C, and F. That's F major in first inversion. G, B flat, D, and G. Might be tempted to call this a 2 chord, but I think, and if you've watched my videos in the past, I think this E is our chord tone, E, G, and B flat. This is E diminished in first inversion, and it makes sense because this is an imperfect authentic cadence. We're connecting 2 tonic triads, 1-6, 7-6, and 1, and we see this progression go in both directions, 1-7-6-1-6, or 1-6-7-6, and 1. Sometimes we see the 1-6 going to 7-6 going to 1-6, or I shouldn't say sometimes, I should say there's been one time where I've seen that particular progression, but here it's typically a way to traverse the distance between 2 inverted chords of the same structure, so in this case 2 1 chords separated by a chord a diatonic step below it in first inversion. So this could be 4-6, 3-6-4, or 2-6-1-6-1, but this one is particularly special because it's a chord, a tonic chord, dominant tonic. It's really the only permutation that has that. Looking ahead, we have another perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor, and I think we modulate to G minor right off the bat via an F chord, which is very interesting. F, C, F, and A. So it's kind of interesting, but still, it's an F major chord. And we get a bit of a transitive progression here. We get C, C, F, and G, but this F is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, and this is actually a 4 chord, C minor. So we usually expect 4 to go to 7, but here we have 7 going to 4, and this is just an example of, approaching the dominant from another direction. This 4 could go to 5, 5 could go to 1, or 4 can just go to 1. It really is whatever, but we would expect the progression to go in the opposite direction because of the cycle of falling fifths. But as we've seen in Bach's music, he often turns the cycle of falling fifths in the other direction, more into the cycle of falling fourths or the cycle of raising fifths. Okay, moving on, we have G, B flat, D, and B flat, tonic triad, root position, delayed passing tone here in the tenor before we get D, D, G, and A. This G is a 4-3 suspension over the D, or the F, the G is a 4-3 suspension over the D, the F sharp is the resolution. It's a 5 chord, D major. We then get B flat, D, G, and B flat, G minor in first inversion. Then we have a passing tone in the tenor before we get E flat, B flat, G, and G. E flat major, which is a 6 chord. We've seen a couple of 6 chords so far. This A is a non-chord tone, this C is a non-chord tone. We don't have to worry about that G. We get D, A, D, and F sharp. That's a 5 chord, D major, and then we cadence on 1, G, B flat, D, and G, G minor. And very interestingly, we end on a half cadence in the key of G minor, so no modulations, but still it's quite interesting, this last little progression here. We have another G minor chord, same thing as the last, the separation between the first and second sections, the A and the B section. We have the same G minor chord, but the bass is leapt up an octave. F sharp, A, D, and D. It's a 5-6 chord, D major in first inversion. G, D, G, and B flat. That's a G minor chord, root position. A, C, F, and C. We're seeing a couple of uses of the subtonic 7th. It's actually redundant, just the subtonic chord, F major, but this time it's in root position. First inversion. Last time we saw it was in root position. Here we have B flat, D, F, and D, and you might be tempted to call this a 3 chord. I think this G is more likely to be our chord tone, so I'm going to say that that's my primary analysis, but I think 3 or 1, 1/6, they're both pretty much interchangeable. 7 wants to go to 3, 7 also wants to go to 1. This has been kind of a, definitely not on the strict end of the tonal chorale spectrum. It definitely has a little bit of modal influence. This flat 5, a lot of uses of the flat 6 as well. Yeah, so I'd say all in all it's a toss-up here because 7 can go to either of them pretty interchangeably, and the difference between 3 and 1 is pretty negligible in this context. And as we're getting ready for the cadence, we have C, E flat, A, and C. That's A diminished over C. It's a 2-6 chord. C sharp, E, G, and B flat. So this is a purely like chromatic bass line here. C, C sharp, and D. We would expect 2-6 to go to 5, but what separates 2 and 5, which is our last chord, spoiler, D, F sharp, D, and A, is the 7 fully diminished in root position of 5. C sharp fully diminished, which is an interesting progression, and I guess technically speaking you could spruce up any progression with the secondary dominant of the chord that you're going to, but what ends up happening is that if you precede a chord, this the chord is D major, we could have just turned this first chord into A major, but that's not what Bach was going for. We have these parallel minor thirds going on, C sharp to E flat, C to E flat, C sharp to E, and then he breaks that minor third cycle with a major third at the end. It's interesting. Yeah, this is a pretty quaint chorale. It was nice to analyze, especially in comparison to the hectic chorales that we've had the last couple of days. But all in all, fairly straightforward to analyze. I think it's always super fascinating to see chorales that end with unexpected cadences. A couple of different interesting progressions to take note of here, starting on a secondary dominant. This suspension figure at the beginning is really interesting, and ending on a half cadence with a secondary dominant is really interesting as well. But I will end the chorale or the analysis with those closing thoughts. So thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel. I recently checked my YouTube studio and saw that I had 40 subscribers. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I'm glad that there are people who are enjoying these videos or are able to use them for their classes. Hopefully my insight is helpful for you, or whether you're learning this music or you're just analyzing it because it was an assignment, or because you're just interested in learning more about Bach. This has been a really incredible journey so far, and we are, let's see how far along in the journey we are. So this is episode 129. and there are like 420-ish chorales. Oh goodness, I can't do the math in my head. We're a little bit more than a quarter of the way there, I think. Yeah, a little bit more than a quarter of the way there. Very exciting. I'm keeping up a video every single day, so if you're interested in following along on this journey, if you're watching this video as I'm making the journey, feel free to subscribe. I have hundreds of videos scheduled for the future, and if you're interested in this sort of thing, yeah, definitely keep watching. I'd be happy to have you. But on that note, again, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.